In today's video, I'm going to do a walkthrough of the writing section of SAT Practice Test 5. I've scored perfectly on back-to-back SAT writing sections, and as I go through this practice test, I'm going to show you the most efficient way to answer each and every question, and I'm also going to show you some tips, tricks, and grammar rules that you need to know for the SAT writing section. So with all that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start by reading through the passage, and as I get to any questions, as I do my read-through, I'll go ahead and answer those. So we can go ahead and start off. We have paleontologists are using modern technology to gain a greater understanding of the distant past. With the aid of computer tomography, CT scanning, and 3D printing, researchers are able to create accurate models of prehistoric fossils. At this point, the writer is considering adding in the following sentence: fossils provide paleontologists with a convenient way of estimating the age of the rock in which the fossils are found. Should the writer make this addition here? Well, if we're considering adding a sentence like this, we want to get some more context, especially when it's the beginning of our passage. So we need to know what comes after or in the rest of this paragraph, right? So what's the rest of this paragraph about? Well, we have these models have expanded researchers' knowledge of ancient species and we can go ahead and answer this, something to advance the field of paleontology in the years to come. Now in this case, we see in our answer choices, we have all different words, okay? And we also see that we have the same, tense and the same number. So we know this is a question where we're dealing with matching tone. Now in this case, this is a scientific passage. We're talking about the field, of paleontology. We're talking about some models, potentially fossils, even though we haven't really focused in on that yet, right? Ancient species. So we see that this is an academic piece of writing. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining an academic tone then, right? So we can go ahead and write that down. We want to maintain that academic tone. If we take a look at our answer choices, we wouldn't say that they swear to advance the field of paleontology, right? And if we want to know what they is, right, we can go ahead and go up. We see that we're talking about the models. Okay, the models don't swear to advance the field. They don't subscribe to, they don't vow to, but they promise to. Okay, that's matching that tone, and it's also providing a word that has that correct meaning there. So we can go ahead and answer 2. Now, if we go back up to 1, now are we going to want to add this sentence? Well, what we see is that we continue our discussion of the models. Okay, we're not really worried about the fossils. And another thing that we can do to sort of analyze this is we see that we're talking about models in this previous sentence, and we can continue that discussion in that next sentence. So if you ever see that you're talking about something in a previous sentence, right, before you're considering adding something, and then what comes after that sentence you're considering adding is also that same topic, you don't want to interrupt that. So we don't want to interrupt that discussion of models by talking about fossils, okay? So we don't want to add this. We don't want to add it because it's not directly related to the main point of the paragraph. It's not undermining any claim, so that's going to be incorrect. So we know our answer there's got to be C. All right, let's go ahead and keep moving. So we got CT scanners use X-rays to map the surface of a fossil in minute detail, recording as many as 1 million data points to create a digital blueprint. A 3D printer then builds a polymer model based on this blueprint, much as a regular computer printer reproduces digital documents on paper. Now we're told the writer is considering deleting the underlined sentence. Should we keep the sentence or delete it? Let's go ahead and keep reading. We see that what comes after, okay, and now keep in mind the reason that I'm jumping to what comes after this underlined portion is because I want to see how it connects to what came before. Okay, so we want to see how these two sentences relate before we consider what's in the middle. We have the plastic hardens quickly. Okay, now one thing that jumps out to me immediately, I don't know what plastic I'm referring to because it wasn't talked about before this underlined portion. Next thing that we've got, we can go and answer number 4 as well here while we're at this point. We have the plastic hardens quickly, and then something allows the printer to build the layers of the final model. Okay, now we see there that we have to use which, because if we take a look at answer choices A, B, and D, they would all create 2 independent clauses, but they're only connected by a comma without one of the fanboys there, okay? And we can't connect 2 independent clauses with only a comma. That'd be a comma splice. So we see our answer has to be C. C also has the correct relative pronoun to refer to that process of the plastic, where we say the plastic hardens quickly. We're using which to tell us that we're referring to that full phrase of those 4 words, or I'm sorry, to that full independent clause of those 4 words. Okay, so we know our answer for 4 has got to be C. Now, going back to 3, like I said, we don't know what this plastic is, right? So one thing I'm looking for is in this underlined portion, if we can go ahead and figure out what that is, because if we can, we're going to want to keep it. So let's go ahead and read through. So we have, whereas the head of an ordinary computer printer moves back and forth while printing ink onto paper, the corresponding part of a 3D printer moves in multiple dimensions while squirting out thin layers of melted polymer plastic. So I see there I really need to include this sentence because it's talking or introducing this melted polymer plastic, which I'm then talking about in this sentence after. So I have to keep it, so I can go ahead and get rid of C and D. And the other thing too, as far as another reason why I want to keep it, is I see in my sentence before, I say a 3D printer builds a polymer-based model of the blueprint. Okay, and then I compare that to how our regular computer printer reproduces digital documents. Well, now I'm describing this process that the 3D printer is using, okay? So since I'm describing that process, what comes before this underlined portion is then being illustrated through the underlined portion. So I want to keep this. Now, why do I want to keep it? Well, we have option A, because it helps explain why X-rays are used in CT scanners. That's not what we're doing here, okay? That's an incorrect statement. And then B, kept because it illustrates provides details to illustrate how a 3D printer works, right? That's exactly what it's doing, illustrating that first part of the previous sentence, and we also kind of need to have it because it's connecting that plastic component there. Okay, so we can go ahead and keep reading now. We have compared with older ways of modeling fossils, scanning and printing in this way is extremely versatile. Okay, I see I have a 1 at the beginning of a paragraph, which means I'm going to go find the question that's referring to that so I can answer it while I read. So we have to make this paragraph most logical, sentence 2 should be placed where? What I'm going to do is I'm going to find sentence 2, determine what should come before and potentially what could come after it. So we have but now, so that's indicating to me a transition from the past. 3D scale models can be rearranged with ease, which is a huge boon to its scientists. Boon just means advantages if you didn't know that. So afterwards, I'll be looking for some sort of discussion of an advantage to scientists using these new 3D scale models, okay? So let's go ahead and keep reading through then. We can go ahead and start from the beginning. We have one significant benefit of 3D printing technology is its ability to create scale reproductions of fossils. Skip over to a team led by Drexel University professor Kenneth Lacavora is making models of dinosaur bones 1/10 the bone's original sizes in order to learn. And then if I go and look at my answer choices, I see that they're all just sort of differences in word choice. I see this is going to be an idiom question. Okay, so this is a question about which answer choice is idiomatic. The reason I know that is because I'm not really dealing with any sort of changes in tense or in number or anything like that, or in changes of word choice in a sense. The big difference here is, the way that these are phrased and what someone would naturally say, what we would naturally say with the English language. Now, we would say, he's making the models in order to learn how they fit together. We wouldn't say in order for learning, because that's not idiomatic. We wouldn't say so that one is learning, also not idiomatic, and also we wouldn't say so to learn. So when dealing with idiom questions, you really want to think about what you'd naturally say and what sounds right. And in this case, that'll be answer choice A. So let's go ahead and keep reading. We see in sentence 4, we have in the past. Okay, I've been looking for that, for what comes before that sentence I want to place, so I'll keep reading. In the past, such research was limited by the weight and bulk of the fossils, as well as, and this is going to have to be, their preciousness and fragility. How do I know that? Well, I need to determine what noun I'm referring to, because ultimately I'm going to be putting a pronoun here. Well, the noun I'm referring to is fossils. Fossils is plural, so I can't use its. Okay, I have to use their. Now, what's the correct form of their? That's going to be THEIR, okay? That's what we're using for plural possessive. When you have a plural subject that's also possessive, we use THEIR. All right, so now I've seen that I have in the past, which is what I want to come before my sentence, but I want to keep reading on one more sentence to see if we are still in the past in sentence 5 here. So we have in many cases, scientists had to rearrange bones virtually using artists' renderings. I see I'm still in the past there. Okay, we see we have had to. So that's telling me then that sentence 2 has to come after sentence 5. Okay, so we can go ahead and put that after sentence 5. All right, we can go and keep moving on. We got, because CT scanners can map objects that are impossible to excavate, CT scanning and 3D printing can also be used to reproduce fossils that scientists cannot observe firsthand. Now I've got some sort of transition here. In order to determine what that has to be, I have to read this sentence. We have researchers from the National Museum of Brazil, and then we're going to have some sort of tense here. Okay, I see it's tense change because these are the same base word but different tenses. On this technique to study a fossilized skeleton that was discovered protruding from a rock at an old Sao Paulo railroad site. Well, what I see there is that I'm providing an example of using that technique, right? That technique that I talked about in this previous sentence is now what I'm talking about, or what I'm illustrating. We're giving an example of, giving an example of in that next sentence. So we're not going to use besides, we're not going to use to contrast, we're not going to use nonetheless. We're providing an example, therefore our answer there's got to be D. Now, for determining our tense in number 9, a couple of things we want to look for. Maintaining the same number as the subject we're referring to, so we can go ahead and determine that subject. I see I have from the National Museum of Brazil. I know that that's a prepositional phrase, so I can go ahead and ignore that when determining my number. So if I scroll up, I see I've got researchers as my subject. So my subject is going to be plural. Since I know my subject is going to be plural, I can get rid of A because it would have to be have relied since it's plural. I can go ahead and get rid of D because it would have to be are relying since it's plural. Now I'm between B and C. I see C is in the future. I know that this is going to likely be in the past. I'll keep reading just to make sure, which is a strategy you can use if you're ever wondering whether something's past, future, or trying to determine tense. So we'll go ahead and keep reading before we come back and answer 9. We have the fossil was too delicate to be removed from the rock. In this case, I'm combining these underlined portions. We have because the fossil's delicate nature, the team dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to the lab. Big thing here, I don't want to say delicate twice, so any answer choice that says delicate twice, I'm going to get rid of. So let's go ahead and take a look. When dealing with combining combining underlined portions like this, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and start with the shortest answer choice first. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, I see my shortest answer choice is going to be C, so I'd start there, then I'd go D, and then I'd look at, A and B as being 3 and 4 there. So let's go ahead and start with 1. So we have the fossil was too delicate to be removed from the rock, so the team dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to the lab. We see that there's no repetition or redundancy there. It's grammatically correct, so that's going to be our correct answer. And I'll go ahead and show you why A, B, and D are all wrong here as well. So we have A, the fossil could not be removed from the rock on account of it being too delicate. And then we have, moreover, the team dug up a block of stone around it and brought it to their lab. Well, for one thing, we don't really want to include that transition word in the middle of our sentence there like that. And the other thing too is saying on account of it being too delicate, that's super wordy. Okay, that's really wordy. We don't want to be wordy when we're combining sentences like that. So that's why we can go ahead and get rid of A. Looking at B, the team thought the fossil was too delicate to remove from the rock, and their next decision was to dig up a block of stone around the fossil and bring it to their lab. So the key thing here is when they say and their next decision was to, that's also something that's very wordy. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put W's next to those because they're wordy. We don't want to pick an answer choice that's wordy. We want to be as concise as we can without losing the correct meaning. And if we look at answer choice D, we have in removing the fossil from the rock, the team found it was too delicate. Then they dug up a block of stone around the fossil and brought it to their lab. One thing that's incorrect here is it's showing that these follow in a sequence, which they do, but we want to show that it's a causal relationship like we do in C with the word so, right? Because it's too delicate, that's why they made that decision to dig up that block of stone. Okay, so that's why answer choice D would be incorrect. Also, we don't really want to start out by saying in removing the fossil from the rock, the team found it was too delicate, because they don't really just remove the fossil, they end up having to dig up the stone around the fossil. So answer choice D is also confusing there. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading through. Let's go ahead and make sure that we come back and answer choice 9 as well. Or I'm sorry, question 9. So we have, with the aid of a CT scanner and a 3D printer, they were able to produce a risen model of the fossil. Okay, we see that they're able to produce that model. That means it's going to be in the past. That means my answer there's got to be B. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. Examining the model, the researchers determined that, and that's going to be, looks like some sort of pronoun. We see it could be he or she, they, it, or one. We got to figure out what subject it's referring to. We see that that's going to be the researchers, which is plural. Therefore, our answer there's got to be they. That's the correct pronoun that matches researchers. All right, let's go ahead and make sure that we answered all of our questions in this passage, and we see that we have, so we can go ahead and keep on going to passage number 2 now. All right, so passage number 2, we have Thomas Nast, the crusading cartoonist. So stop them pictures. Legend has it the corrupt politician William Boss Tweed once used those words when ordering someone to offer a bribe to Thomas Nast, an artist who had become famous for cartoons that called for reforms to end corruption. Now I've got some transition word or potentially no transition word since we have answer choice D. So I'm going to go ahead and read this next sentence. We have Tweed's attempt to silence the artist failed, and Nast's cartoons published in magazines like Harper's Weekly actually played a key role in bringing Boss Tweed and his cronies to justice. In this case, there's really no transition word that comes to mind to connect those two. Okay, this isn't a result. There's no result from that first sentence to the second one. There's no causal relationship. So I can go ahead and get rid of A and B because there's no causal relationship. And then C, this isn't in addition to, right? This is just another statement. Since these are really just two statements, we can go ahead and pick answer choice D. We're not going to have one of those three transitions there, A, B, or C. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. So question 13, combining sentences again. So we're going to use that same strategy I talked about, starting with the shortest answer first, and then we'll go up from there. So I can go ahead and mark the order that I would approach these in. So if we take a look at D, we have in the 1860s, and I'm going to go ahead and start from reading with answer choice D. In the 1860s and 1870s, powerful political organizations known as political machines started taking control of governments. Okay, I see that that's grammatically correct. It's short, it's concise, so that's going to be my answer more than likely. I'll go ahead and quick take a look at A, B, and C here as well. Just go ahead and show you why they're wrong. So we'll go ahead and start with answer choice C. So we have city governments were taken control of in the 1860s and the 1870s, and powerful political organizations known as political machines did so. Well, we know that they took control of it, and now we're saying did so. Okay, that's repetitive, that's redundant, so I can go ahead and get rid of answer choice C. Looking at number 3 now, or answer choice B, known as political machines. And then we have in the 1860s and 1870s, political organizations that were powerful started taking control of city government. So as you can see, that really does not flow well. Just another thing too, we see that we want to include, the years here. In this case, we'd be indicating that they're non-essential. We really kind of need them to be essential here because we are giving sort of a time context. Also, we're saying known as political machines, and then we've got political organizations that were powerful started taking control of city governments. That's not the best way that we could use a modifier there. So B's got a lot of problems. More than anything, it really does not flow well. It's wordy. It could be made significantly more concise like it is in answer choice D. Looking at A, powerful political organizations in the 1860s and 70s started taking control of city governments, and they were known as political machines. Okay, and they were known as, that could be taken out, and we can make that more concise like we do in answer choice D. Now, when I say it could be taken out, I'm not saying it could be taken out without changing other things in the sentence because other things would have to be changed. But if we take a look at answer choice D, we see that it's a much more concise and efficient way of saying, what we were saying in these other answer choices. So we want to focus in on concision when dealing with a combining underlined sentences question. All right, so focus on concision and also make sure that you're not being repetitive or redundant. Make sure everything's grammatically correct and you should be good to go when combining underlined sentences. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. We have these political machines were able to pack legislatures and courts with handpicked supporters by purchasing votes. And then we have a form of election fraud involving the exchange of money or favors for votes. Now, in this case, what we have is we have a relative clause that's explaining that purchasing votes that came before it. Now, when we have a relative clause, we don't need any words between the comma and the relative clause that's explaining what came before that comma. Okay, so we don't need being, we don't need that is, we don't need which it is. We have that relative clause. We don't need anything splitting that up from the comma. So our answer there is going to be A. All right, keep reading. We have once a political machine had enough control of important positions, its members were able to use public funds to enrich themselves and their friends. Boss tweets Tammany Hall Group. Then we have a comma, which controlled New York City in the 1860s, stole more than $30 million. I see I'm going to have a non-essential phrase or clause here. Okay. The reason I know it's non-essential is because if I took out which controlled New York City in the 1860s and I just kept reading on for that sentence, I'd have boss tweets Tammany Hall Group stole more than $30 million. I see that makes sense on its own. Therefore, I know that, what I crossed out here is going to be non-essential. Now, with a non-essential phrase or clause, we got to offset it with either two commas, two parentheses, or two em dashes. I see I have that comma, after Tammany Hall Group, so I have to have that comma after 1860s. Looking at my answer choices, that means I can get rid of answer choice A and answer choice D. I also don't need a comma after the word city. That's unnecessary, so my answer there is going to be B. All right, moving on. We've got the writers considering deleting the underlined sentence. Okay, so we have the equivalent of more than $365 million today. In this case, since I'm considering something where I'm going to add or keep or delete a sentence, I'm going to go ahead and read what the next sentence will be. So I have Tammany Hall was so powerful and corrupt that the New York Times, okay, this right here, we can't have a comma between that and then after times because that would indicate it's not essential. We know that this is essential. So we can go ahead and get rid of A. We can also go ahead and get rid of answer choice B. Once again, like we said with those two commas, that'd be indicating that it's not essential. We know that this is essential because we have to know who's saying this. If we take a look at answer choices C and answer choices D, we don't need that comma in D between times and commented. We do need that comma after commented though, because we are introducing then this quote. So we know our answer there has to be C. Now, going back up into answer choice 16 here, we see that we close out the paragraph where there's absolutely nothing in the city that is beyond the reach of the insatiable gang, indicating, that he was initially elected to a single 2-year term in Congress. That's disrupting this conversation about the corruption that goes on, right? As we can see in this paragraph, we're really focused in on talking about the corruption. We see that we had already been talking about the 60s and 70s. So moving back to 1852 makes no sense here, right? It's blurring our focus with a loosely related information. Okay, so that'll be our answer there. If we look at D, deleted because it contains information that undermines the main claim, there's no undermining of our main claim there. All right, we can go and keep reading. We have given the context or given the extent of Tweed's power, it is remarkable that a single cartoonist could have played such a significant role in bringing about his downfall. Nass cartoons depicted Tweed as a big bloated thief. One of the artist's most famous images, I see that my answer there has to be A because if we look at B through D, they're all famously and commonly known or well known. That's all redundant. Famous means well known. It means commonly known. We want to avoid repetition and redundancy on the SAT writing section as much as we can. Therefore, our answer there has to be A. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. We have Tweed with a bag, or the images showed Tweed with a bag of money in place of his head. Now we're told which choice adds the most relevant supporting information to the paragraph. Well, let's go ahead and read on a little bit more context of our paragraph. We have another featured Tweed leaning against a ballot box with the caption, "As long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it?" These cartoons were so effective in part because many citizens who supported Tweed were illiterate and thus could not read the newspaper accounts of his criminal activities. Nass cartoons, though, widely exposed the public to the injustice of Tweed's political machine. All right, so as we can see there, we're still focusing in on that corrupt element, especially, when we're talking about him being a big bloated thief. And then we go on to sort of give examples about how he was corrupt. So we want to focus on the corruption. So if we look at answer choice A, like many other of Nass cartoons, that one was published in Harper's Weekly. That's not focused on the corruption aspect. Answer choice B, Nass would later illustrate Tweed's escape from prison. That's out of order. Looking at C, one depiction that omits Tweed's signature hat. That's unimportant. D, an image that perfectly captured Tweed's greedy nature. Yes, that's indicating, that Tweed was very corrupt, that he was greedy. That's going to be our answer there. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading on. So we have Nass' campaign to bring down Tweed and the Tammany Hall gang was ultimately successful in the elections of 1871. The public voted against most of the Tammany Hall candidates, greatly weakening Tweed's power. Eventually, Tweed and his gang were... and then we got persecuted, which is answer choices A, B, and C. We know it has to be prosecuted, okay? Persecuted would mean something like oppressed, Prosecuted is what it means to bring charges on someone. Okay, so this is a question dealing with homophones. You have to know the correct homophone to get this question right. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. Including fraud and larceny, and many of them were sent to jail. In 1875, Tweed escaped from jail and fled to Spain, and unwittingly, okay, and then we're going to have some sort of answer choice dealing with, bringing or brought. We have to have the correct tense right here, okay, as well as number. We know that who we're referring to is Tweed, okay, so we're looking for the singular verb. And we also know that we have escaped right here within the sentence. So we're talking in the past tense, okay, so it's not bringing, it's not brings, and we're not going to be using has brought either because this isn't, I believe, the perfect past tense. This right here is just simple past tense, right? He brought about one final, and then we're going to have some answer choice here, okay? But we know that this is past tense, so our answer there has to be simple past tense, answer choice A. All right, and then we have one final what for the power of political cartoons. We have to keep reading on to figure out what. A Spanish police officer recognized Tweed from one of Nass's cartoons. Consequently, Tweed was sent back to jail, and Nass was hailed as the man who toppled the great Tammany Hall machine. We see our options are pinnacle, triumph, culmination, or apex. I see right here our answer has got to be triumph because this ultimately is a win for political cartoons, right? Or showing the power of the political cartoons. We're showing that this is a triumph for them. Why is it a triumph? They were able to send Tweed back to jail. Okay, since they were able to send Tweed back to jail, that's a triumph. Answer choices C, D, and A would all be indicating, like the end of something or sort of the peak of something that's happening. In this case, we're talking about a win for the power of political cartoons. Our answer there has to be B. All right, moving on to passage number 3, we have rethinking crowdfunding in the arts. Crowdfunding is a popular way to raise money using the internet. The process sounds simple. An artist, entrepreneur, or other innovator takes his or her ideas straight to the public via a crowdfunding website. The innovator creates a video about the project and offers, in exchange for donations, a series of perks from acknowledgement on a social media site to a small piece of art. Many crowdfunding programs are all or nothing. In other words, the innovator must garner 100% funding for the project, and the money is refunded to the donors. Then we have either its best or their best. Now we have to keep in mind we have the correct its here, right? And in this case, we often have to figure out our subject. In this case, we are referring to the system. The system is singular, so we can go ahead and get rid of answer choice D. We see C isn't even a word. Okay, that's not any correct form of its at all. And if we look at answer choices A and B, we know the correct form of its when we're trying to show something that's singular and possessive is answer choice B. Okay, answer choice A would be it is. Okay, we need answer choice B to show something is singular and possessive. All right, let's keep reading. The homepage of one leading crowdfunding site features a project to manufacture pinhole cameras on a 3D printer. If we look at 24, we have to combine the underlined sentences, which are the idea is obviously very attractive. An obscure method of photography may be made available to many with little expense. Now, what we need to understand here is that we have a claim that the idea is very attractive. And then what comes after that is a description of why, right? An obscure method of photography may be made available to many with little expense. So when dealing with combining underlined sentences, like I said before, we're always going to start with the shortest answer choice first. We go something like this. Okay, we see 2, 3, and 4 are all about the same length, but we can go ahead and start with 1. So we have the idea is obviously very attractive, so we're starting with that claim. And then after that, we have some evidence, right? An obscure method of photography may be made available to many at little expense. Okay, that is illustrating the idea in our first independent clause. So we're connecting 2 independent clauses with a colon, okay, where the second independent clause is illustrating the first. There's no wordiness, there's no redundancy, there's no repetitiveness. So we see answer choice B there will be our correct answer. Now I'll go ahead and show you why A, C, and D are incorrect here real quick. We see A with the idea being obviously very attractive, with the idea being that's wordy, okay, it's not concise. A is incorrect. C, an obscure method of photography may be made available to many at little expense, and the idea is obviously very attractive. In this case, we're going with explanation and then claim, okay? We want to go claim and then explanation, so that's why answer choice C is wrong. Looking at D, an obscure method of photography, an idea that is obviously very attractive. Well, in this case, what's actually very attractive is that full idea together, right? What's actually attractive is that the obscure method of photography may be made available to many at little expense. Answer choice D is making this really confusing, so that's why D is incorrect there. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. So for 25 now, we have within weeks the project was 621% funded. In contrast, on the same page, a small Brooklyn performance venue is attempting to raise money for its current season. The venue features works of performance art showcased in a storefront window. Those who have seen the space consider it vital. Now we're going to go ahead and transition from that previous sentence to this new sentence. That group may not be large enough with just 14 to go in the fundraising period. The campaign is only 46% funded. Well, that right there is indicating a contrast, right? We have people who are considering it vital, but at the same time, it's going to go unfunded, right? That group's not large enough. Okay, so those are contrasting ideas. Okay, it's not causal, so B is incorrect. We want to focus on that contrast with answer choice A. However, it's not going to be in effect because once again, no effect there. And then D, as a rule, we're not providing any sort of rule there. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. Artists such as these Brooklyn performers find that crowdfunding exacerbates problems that already exist. In this case, we see that we have just sort of varying punctuation in answer choices A through D, so we want to make sure we have the correct punctuation here. So we have work that is easily understood and appreciated. So that is easily understood and appreciated is a restrictive clause referring to work. We don't want to split up the restrictive clause from what it's referring to with any sort of punctuation. So we can get rid of answer choice D, we can get rid of answer choice A as well. So we have work that is easily understood and appreciated is supported. Keep in mind, we don't need a comma after appreciated there. So let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. None of them have that, right? We're looking at this comma here. We don't need to split up two things with a comma, right? So we know our answer there has to be answer choice B. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. We have, well, more complex work goes unnoticed. And then we have 27. Should we add this following sentence? Let's go ahead and read this next sentence first. Time that could be used creating art spent devising clever perks to draw the attention of potential contributors. All right, so right here, these past two sentences have just been sort of illustrating that exacerbation of problems that already exist. We don't want to interrupt that. If we take a look at this sentence here that we're asked if we want to add, we have crowdfunding tends to attract contributors for a wide variety of professional fields. That would be interrupting that discussion, of those two illustrations of how these problems are being exacerbated. So it's blurring the focus of our paragraph with a poorly integrated piece of information. So our answer there would have to be D. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. So we have 28. And one thing I will just quick say on 27 as well, if we were to take a look at answer choice C, because it fails to take into account project funding received from public institutions, I mean, the thing is with that, even though maybe potentially it's true, that's not the main reason, right? The real reason we don't want to include it is because it's blurring the focus of our paragraph. So just be sure that you're reading all of the answer choices when you are going through questions like these, just to make sure that you're not missing anything. Because you might look at C and say, okay, that could be true, but at the same time, that's not the reason that we don't want to add it. The reason that we don't want to add it is because we'd be blurring the focus of the paragraph. So make sure you do read all the answer choices when dealing with a question like that, where you're asked to add, keep, or delete a sentence, something like that. All right, now we got 28. Okay, so we see that we've got a transition word between sentences. We've got audiences may contain many free riders, and this will have to be who do not make, or who may not make contributions, right? We want to have something there. Okay, we wouldn't say not making, we wouldn't say to not, because both of those would be unclear, who we're referring to. And then looking at answer choice A versus C then for 29 real quick. If we were to look at A, okay, we'd have audiences may contain many free riders. That would be an independent clause. And then we would have they did not make contributions. That'd be another independent clause. We would be connecting them with only a comma. So that'd be a comma splice. We know that A would be incorrect. We see our answer there would have to be answer choice C, okay? So it'd have to be who did not make. All right, now going back to 28 and trying to sort of transition between those two sentences. What we see is that we've got another example of where these problems are being exacerbated by crowdfunding, okay? We had a previous example talking about, that time is spent devising clever perks instead of focusing on the art. And then we have another example where audiences may contain free riders. So that's giving another example in addition to the others. So our answer there would have to be answer choice A. All right, moving on, we've got, ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for the arts if people begin to feel that paying for the art loved by them. That's not how we would want to phrase that. We would want to say they love. Answer choice B. How do we know that? Well, we would be being very wordy if we were to pick C and A. I hope that you can see that, right? If we were to say loved by them or loved by him or her, that's wordy. Same thing with he or she love, right? We're referring to the art loved by people, so that's the art they love, okay? So we want to be as concise as we can there, also making sure that we have the correct subject that we're referring to. In this case, that's going to be people, right? For the arts, if people begin to feel that paying for the art they love is someone else's responsibility. So referring to our subject, people there. All right, once again, we see we have a number at the beginning of our paragraph. We're going to find the sentence we got to place. It's going to be sentence 2. So we have though the price. So we want to focus on some sort of price before this. For her tickets was higher than that of tickets of comparable shows. It was still affordable to most theater goers and reflected the real cost of the performance. All right, big thing here is that before we place this, we want to have some sort of discussion about the price, maybe how we get there, something like that. So let's go ahead and read through. One innovative playwright has woven the deficiencies of the system into her crowdfunding model. And then we have, she presented the total cost for producing her play on a crowdfunding site. Then she divided the total cost by the number of people she expected to attend the performance. The result of the calculation was the minimum donor price, and only donors who paid at least the minimum ticket price were allowed to attend the performance. All right, so now I've seen how she arrives at this ticket price. So that's telling me then, now transitioning into though the price for her tickets was higher than that of comparable shows, I've now seen why, which is telling me that I can then place this after sentence 5. The reason why is I've now shown how she's arriving at the ticket price, and now I'm showing the result of that. The result being, even though it may be higher than comparable shows, it's still affordable and reflects the real cost. I know it reflects the real cost because of the information that came before it in sentences 3, 4, and 5. So I want to place this then after sentence 5. All right. Now we have, by subverting the presumption that money used for her project is an altruistic donation, the playwright showed that her work, how do I know it has to be her work? Because it's her project. We know who we're referring to. It's one person and it's a female. Okay, so our answer there has to be C. 32, we already answered that one. Let's go ahead and make sure, we'll go with 33 and then we'll make sure we answered all of them in this passage. We have crowdfunded projects on Kickstarter in 2012. Which choice offers an accurate interpretation of the graphs? So in this case, if you have to offer an accurate interpretation, really what you ultimately have to do is you kind of got to go through A through D. So we'll go ahead and start with A. The project category with the lowest amount of money raised was also the most successfully funded. We'll go to money raised. Lowest amount is going to be dance. Is that the most successfully funded? That's going to be based on success rate. We have percentage of fully funded projects. Highest there is dance. We see A will be true there. Okay, so that's the true statement. That's an accurate interpretation. All right, so we've got investigative journalism and evolving American tradition. Once again, I see I've got that number there, so I'm going to find the sentence I'm placing. Looks like it's going to be on 34. Okay, so we have, for the sake of logic and cohesion, sentence 3 should be placed where? Let's go ahead and read sentence 3. We're starting out with newspapers. I want to talk something about newspapers before it. And then the traditional nurturing ground for investigative journalism have been hit especially hard by the widespread availability of free news online. So I'd want to then elaborate on how they've been especially hit hard by that availability of free news online. So let's go ahead and read through. So we have 1. There's the recent precipitous decline of print journalism as a viable profession has exacerbated long-held concerns about the state of investigative reporting in the United States. All right, so that's introducing the decline in print journalism, right? We know that newspapers are a form of print journalism, so we could potentially be placing this after sentence 1. Let's go ahead and read sentence 2. Facing lower print circulation and diminished advertising revenue. Okay, so now we're starting to get into a discussion of how the newspapers have been hit hard, right? I talked about how what comes after sentence 3 right now should be a discussion of how they've been hit hard by the widespread availability of free news online, and we see that they're facing lower print circulation. Okay, so we see sentence 3 should come between sentences 1 and 2, so that would be after sentence 1. So our answer there would be C. All right, moving on, we got to go to 35. So we have to survive, investigative journalism must continue to adapt to the digital age. It's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. Okay, and then we have their work is expensive and time-consuming. So we see that we have 2 independent clauses here, right? We have it's not difficult to understand why a cash-strapped, understaffed publication might feel pressure to cut teams of investigative reporters. And then we have another independent clause, their work is expensive and time-consuming. This is illustrating, the second independent clause is illustrating the idea in the first. Therefore, we want to connect the 2 independent clauses with a colon. We also don't need to have any sort of apostrophe in reporters, so we can get rid of A and C based on that as well. All right, moving on to 36. We have something and then the public interest. Investigative journalism involves original, often long-form reporting on such topics. And then we get into question 37. Now, we see investigative journalism. We know it's not taking on the public interest. That would be going against the public interest. We know investigative journalism is advocating for the public interest. Okay, it's undertaken in the public interest. It's not overtaking the public interest, and it's not taking off from public interest. Okay, so we know our answer there has to be B because that's the correct meaning. Now, if we go ahead and keep reading on, we have often long-form reporting on topics such as, we see our other examples are street crime, corporate wrongdoing, and political corruption. We could answer with illegal activities, business scandals, or abuse of government power, or deleting the underlined portion. Key thing we have here is abuse of government power. That's the same as political corruption. Business scandals is the same as corporate wrongdoing, and street crime is the same as illegal activities. Therefore, we would be being redundant if we were to pick A, B, or C, so we have to delete that underlined portion then. Let's go ahead and keep reading. An investigative story involves one or more experienced journalists dedicating their full energy and resources of the publisher to a piece for a prolonged period of time. Expensive legal battles may ensue. The results of the work, though costly, have helped keep those in power accountable. The exposure by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of government misconduct in the Watergate scandal resulted in the resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974. More recently, Seymour Hersh, reporting for The New Yorker in 2004, helped publicize the mistreatment of Iraqi prisoners by U.S. personnel at Abu Ghraib during the Iraq War. Now we're wondering if we should add the following sentence here. One thing that jumps out to me immediately is we're drastically changing our year. We see that we progress chronologically from 1974 into 2004. Okay, we don't really want to break up that chronological order with moving all the way back to 1954 there. Another thing that jumps out to me if we keep reading on, we have Edward R. Murrow and Fred Fredling produced episodes of the CBS television show See It Now that contributed to the end of U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist witch hunts, we'd be switching also in form from print journalism into television shows, which we don't want to do because our discussion here is all about print journalism and investigative reporters in print journalism. So we don't want to make this addition. Okay, we don't want to make it. If we look at C, we have the option of, because it gives an example that's chronologically and substantively out of place in the paragraph, yes. Okay, chronologically because it's the wrong shift in time, and then substantively because we're talking about television. If we were to add this but throughout the paragraph, we're talking about print journalism. And choice D, no, because it provides an example that's inconsistent with the definition of investigative journalism. No, that's not correct. Okay, that sort of addresses the substant idea, but it's not addressing that chronological idea as well, which is an important part of why we don't want to add it there. All right, we have in these and other cases, exposure from reporters has served as an important, and then we have the option of blockade to or scolding of malfeasance. Okay, right there, it's not blocking malfeasance directly. Okay, so that would be incorrect to say. It's not acting as an interference to, it's not directly interfering with it. We wouldn't say a drag on or rebuke or reproof of. Okay, that's not idiomatic. And then answer choice D, it acts as an important deterrent to or rebuke to. Yes, okay, it's acting as a deterrent to because if someone does something wrong, it may show up in the newspaper and have consequences against them. But it's not an active blockade. It's not an active interference. It's not an active, drag on. Also, drag on or reproof of would be not idiomatic there. So our answer has got to be D. All right, moving on. We have, well, worrisome, the decline of traditional print media. And then we're told that which choice most effectively suggests that the end of investigative journalism is a real possibility, but one that can be prevented. Keep in mind, anytime you're given a prompt on the writing section, you want to pay close attention to it. So let's go ahead and pay close attention to what we're asked to do here. Show it's a real possibility, but also one that can be prevented. So we have the option of could not entail the end of investigative journalism. That's not really focusing in on the fact that it's a real possibility or that it's really one that could be prevented. It's kind of vague to say just could there. If we look at answer choice B, need not entail the end of investigative journalism, that's showing that it's a real possibility that it could entail that end of investigative journalism, but that it doesn't have to. Okay, that's telling us it can be prevented. It does not have to. It need not entail the end of investigative journalism. So our answer there would be D. If we look at the option of will not, well, that's telling us that it's not a real possibility. Okay, so that would be why C is wrong. And then it must not, well, that's not addressing that aspect of that it could happen. Okay, so our answer there has to be B. All right, 41, which choice sets up the examples in the following sentences? We need to read on then. So we have nonprofit enterprises, and we've got such as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. In this case, what I'm looking at with such as is if we're going to have commas in it. Whoa, we do not need to have colons anywhere here. Okay, we don't have an independent clause before where we'd be placing these colons, so that's why B and C are wrong. And then with commas, the only way that we would want to put that comma before such as is if it was part of a non-restrictive phrase or clause, and we see that we don't have any sort of commas, coming after this, so we see that it's not going to be part of a non-restrictive phrase or clause. Therefore, our answer there has to be A. We don't need any punctuation there, so our answer would be A. Reading on now so we can get some more context before we go back to 41. We have nonprofit enterprises such as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project have begun to fill the void created by staff losses at newspapers and magazines. Enterprising freelance reporters, newly funded by nonprofits, make extensive use of social media, including blogs and Twitter, to foster public conversation about key issues. The Help Me Investigate project, and then we have, for example, okay, so we'll see if this is actually providing examples or what relationship it has to the previous sentence. Solicited readers to submit tips and information related to ongoing stories to its website. Well, that's sort of illustrating those ideas that we just talked about in the previous two sentences. So this is providing an example. So that's why answer choice A would be correct. We're not indicating any sort of cause, so therefore is incorrect. We're not contrasting anything, so however is incorrect. We're not providing, any sort of transition where we would need in any case, right? We're not sort of, deviating from something and onto something else, so D would be incorrect there as well. Now, at this point, we can really go back to answer or question 41. So what's setting up these examples? Well, these are all examples of how investigative journalism has adapted to being print-free, right? They're now making use of technology. So let's find an answer choice that talks about that. We have option A, although many newsrooms have reduced their staff, some still employ investigative reporters. So that's not indicating that transition there to the digital era of investigative journalism. B, investigative journalism also declined in the 30s and 50s, only to be revived in the 60s. That's also not focusing on the shift that we just talked about. C, according to the Pew Research Center, more people get their national and international news from the internet than from newspapers, also not indicating that shift. And then D, indeed, recent years have witnessed innovative adjustments to changing times. So that's what we go on to discuss there. All right, moving on, we got one more question left, 44. Far from marking the end of investigative journalism, key thing to recognize there, that's an introductory modifier. Okay, so we need to know then what it's modifying. So what comes directly after this comma has to be what this introductory modifying phrase is modifying. Okay, so far from marking the end of investigative journalism, well, that has to refer to this new digital era, right? This era of the internet. So if we look at answer choice A, we have cooperation among among journalists. That's not the correct thing that needs to be modified. B, the number of potential investigators. Also not the thing that has to be modified. C, the advent of the digital age. Yes, that's what needs to be modified. So C could be our correct answer. And then B, by facilitating cooperation. Okay, that's also not what is being modified. So D would be incorrect. So right there, we know C has to be correct because it's the only answer choice that has the correct thing coming after that comma that is being modified. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like and subscribe. In addition to that, if you're looking to donate or if you're looking for my website where I offer private SAT prep, college essay brainstorming, and college essay editing, then be sure to check out the links in the description.